In this world, there are people whose behavior is far from admirable. In everyday life, this may not pose a significant problem, but for those suspected of committing a crime, a bad temper certainly doesn't help the situation. Today's story is about a case that still leaves more questions than answers. It's difficult to say for sure whether the main character was a criminal or a victim of circumstances. Catherine Nevin was born on October 1, 1950, in a small village in County Kildare, Ireland. The girl grew up with her brother in a modest parental home. Studying at a local church school under the guidance of monks, Catherine quickly gained a reputation as a capable, diligent student with remarkable creative potential. From a young age, she demonstrated a talent for handicrafts, which she sought to develop further. Therefore, upon receiving her diploma, young Catherine decided to invest her small savings in the purchase of several sewing machines. Thanks to her hard work and skill, the girl began to successfully develop her own sewing business. In addition to making clothes and accessories, she gave private lessons, realizing that teaching others brought her no less satisfaction than bringing her own designs to life. Fascinated by the beauty industry, Catherine acquired the skills of a makeup artist and stylist. Sophisticated, well-groomed, and charismatic, the girl was not only the embodiment of impeccable taste herself but also willingly shared the secrets of beauty with others, recording instructional videos and conducting workshops. It would seem that the energetic and purposeful Catherine had every chance to succeed in her chosen fields. However, in the middle of the 20th century, enthusiasm alone was not enough for this. Without a stable income and financial support from her family, the girl's ambitious plans to open her own modeling agency remained just dreams. Upset but not discouraged, Catherine took a job as an administrator at a hotel in Dublin. The striking appearance of the new employee quickly made her the face of the establishment. However, this by no means deprived her of the desire to achieve more. A fateful meeting happened when the girl turned 21. It was then that Tom Nevin, a successful businessman a decade older than Catherine, visited the hotel. Enchanted by her beauty and charisma, the man began to persistently seek the girl's affection. Flaring up with a bright flame, the romance developed rapidly, and 5 years later, the lovers got married in Rome. Although Tom did not belong to the very wealthy, his income was quite enough for a comfortable life. Calm, reliable, physically fit, he became the ideal partner for Catherine. In addition, the man always supported his wife in all her endeavors. At the time of the marriage, Tom managed his uncle's pub in Dublin but was already mentally drawing up plans for his own establishment. Together with Catherine, they worked step by step towards a common goal. Gradually, the couple managed not only to accumulate startup capital but also to acquire several real estate properties, the lease of which brought additional income. Catherine took over the design issues and work with tenants, temporarily putting aside her hobbies of sewing and beauty business. And so, in the spring of 1986, the Nevins finally realized their dream, becoming the owners of a hotel with a restaurant in a prestigious area of Dublin. The establishment immediately attracted the attention of both locals and tourists, so the couple spared no effort to make the business thrive. The working day began at 8:30 in the morning and lasted until late at night. However, it was then that all the negative traits of Catherine's character were clearly manifested. Domineering, demanding, and confrontational, she turned the lives of the staff into a real hell. Constant quibbles, humiliation, and quarrels, and all this often in the presence of Tom, who also got his fair share of grief. For the employees, she was the embodiment of severity and even cruelty, while everyone sincerely respected her husband for his prudence, kindness, and almost paternal care for his subordinates. The couple's relationship rapidly deteriorated, and soon the Nevins no longer even shared a bedroom. Instead, Catherine had affairs on the side, meeting with lovers right in the hotel rooms. All of Tom's attempts to rectify the situation were met with a wall of misunderstanding. Even more so, Catherine repeatedly offered her husband a divorce, but he refused, citing his own religious beliefs. Meanwhile, Mrs. Nevin did not miss any opportunity to demonstrate her superiority. She openly flirted with wealthy and influential restaurant clients, choosing revealing outfits and behaving quite boldly. In contrast to her, Tom remained a modest and decent family man, faithfully supporting his wife despite all the troubles. Unfortunately, his efforts were in vain. Moreover, it was his boundless devotion and inability to say no in time that played a cruel joke on him. After all, one day Catherine decided to go too far in her antics. Caitlin, one of the establishment's employees, later spoke about an incident when Lady Boss ordered her to come to work earlier to clean the premises again. The woman obediently got down to business, although cleanliness was already shining all around. No one was surprised by the boss's whims, but that day Catherine demanded that Caitlin stay for a full shift. The worker could not agree to this due to the need to take care of her children, but for the restaurant owner, refusal was unacceptable. So she called the social service and complained that her subordinate refused to work full-time. This deprived Caitlin of the right to social assistance, which was a real blow to the woman and her family. By 1986, the relationship of the Nevin couple had deteriorated to such an extent that they no longer even shared a bedroom. During this period, the couple lived on the second floor of the hotel, which was quite convenient. Tom tried to cross paths with his wife as little as possible, spending all his time in his office on the first floor. Later it became known that Catherine was having affairs on the side. Several witnesses saw men visiting the restaurant, with whom the hostess then spent time separately in one of the rooms. In fact, Mrs. Nevin more than once offered Tom a divorce, but he refused every time, citing his Catholic beliefs. Moreover, the man had already been married before meeting Catherine and did not want to go through all these bureaucratic procedures, nerves, and stress again. The divorce would inevitably lead to the division of jointly acquired property, so, apparently, it was the attachment to the restaurant that forced Tom to put up with his wife's toxic behavior. Perhaps if he had listened to her demands, further tragedy could have been avoided. And he would not have had to endure years of humiliation that Catherine inflicted on him in the presence of the staff. Meanwhile, Mrs. Nevin had affairs with several lovers at once. It should be noted that the woman had too high an opinion of herself, so she talked down to her subordinates. It is clear that she was only interested in wealthy and influential men. When Tom met with one of these people to discuss business matters, his wife was always present at the negotiations, dressed in revealing outfits. For such occasions, she chose ultra-short skirts, deep necklines, and sky-high heels, behaving coquettishly and playfully. Apparently, in this way, Catherine tried to seduce another rich lover or make useful acquaintances. On March 19, 1996, the Nevin couple celebrated the 10th anniversary of owning the restaurant. After a short celebration, Catherine went to bed on the second floor, where she and Tom had their apartments. Her husband, on the other hand, stayed downstairs. He was counting the weekend's proceeds and preparing documents for tomorrow. According to Mrs. Nevin, that night she was attacked. Rough male hands tore the woman out of her sleep, pressing her face into the pillow. The attacker put a blade to Catherine's throat, threatening to kill her, and demanded money and valuables. Taking advantage of the victim's helplessness, the scoundrel her, and then, realizing the futility of his intentions regarding the valuables, simply left. Almost immediately, there was a loud bang. Catherine heard someone rummaging through the rooms, but, according to her confession, she could do nothing. For the first time in her life, the woman found herself in such a hopeless situation, hoping only to survive until morning. Eventually, she heard a noise resembling the sound of car engines that abruptly started and raced away from the restaurant. Catherine called out to Tom, but no one answered. Then she tried to free herself from her bonds and somehow reached the panic button, calling for help. At 4:30 in the morning, the security guards arrived at the scene, who, seeing the traces of a bloody massacre, immediately called the police. The patrol found the body of 55-year-old Tom in the kitchen, in a pool of blood. The man was wearing the glasses he wore for working with papers and money, and was clutching a pen in his hand. As it turned out, the cause of death was a shot to the chest at almost point-blank range. Judging by the charred edges of the bullet hole on the victim's shirt, the killer fired from a very close distance. Examining the crime scene, the police found that the attackers had stolen about 13,000 Irish pounds, as well as the owner's car. The criminals also took some of the things with them. The house was in complete disarray, furniture and other objects were overturned and scattered around the rooms. But what surprised the investigators the most was that nothing had disappeared from Catherine's bedroom. The mistress herself was found by law enforcement officers tied up with her own stockings, her mouth stuffed with women's underwear. The woman said that from the moment the bandits left until she managed to reach the panic button, almost 2 hours had passed. Although the victim was not completely immobilized, such a long period of time seemed suspicious to the cops. Unfortunately, surveillance cameras had not yet been installed either outside or inside the restaurant at that time. But the strangest thing was that no signs of breaking in were found, the doors and windows remained intact. It turns out that the robbers were either familiar with the family or had obtained duplicate keys. Another option is that the house was deliberately left unlocked, and the crime was staged. The cops did not rule out the possibility that Catherine herself could have dealt with her husband, who had enough time to then pretend to be a victim of the attack. Despite the objections of the establishment's owner, the detectives immediately suspected her of involvement in the murder. During the inspection of the scene, the woman kept aloof and told the investigation almost nothing. Forensic experts drew attention to one strange detail: the drawers and shelves were not overturned or turned inside out as if someone deliberately tried to create the illusion of disorder. More and more signs pointed to the staging of the crime because robbers usually act in a hurry, throwing the contents of drawers directly onto the floor. This time, the furniture seemed to be neatly examined from all sides, carefully pulled out and pushed back. The experts found several fingerprints on the shelves. It seemed that the criminals acted extremely carefully and deliberately tried to create the illusion of a robbery. Of course, such details only reinforced suspicions about the staging of the crime. Just a few hours after the incident, the victim's stolen car was found in Dublin. The robbers simply abandoned the car, so the police immediately sent it for examination to the laboratory. Unfortunately, nothing interesting was found. Communicating with the restaurant staff, the investigators found out that the celebration of the 10th anniversary of owning the establishment was significantly different from the previous similar celebrations. According to the employees' recollections, the festivities usually lasted until late at night, and then the guests often stayed overnight right in the hotel rooms. However, this time Catherine insisted that everyone go home, and the hotel remained empty. The hostess's whim seemed strange to the subordinates, but, of course, no one dared to contradict her. This fact immediately attracted the attention of the cops and replenished the list of suspicious details. The detectives considered 46-year-old Catherine Nevin to be the main suspect in the case, but so far, there was no direct evidence of her guilt. Meanwhile, the woman pretended to be an inconsolable widow. She dressed exclusively in black, appeared everywhere with a red rose in her hands, personally accepted condolences, demonstrating incredible mental suffering. After the funeral, she installed a magnificent tombstone for her husband, on which touching poetic lines dedicated to Tom were carved. They spoke of the wife's endless love and devotion. Catherine even paid for the publication of an obituary in a local newspaper, where she spoke about her terrible grief. Of course, such behavior could mislead people who were not familiar with the real state of affairs in the Nevin family. However, the couple's inner circle was already slowly spreading completely different, alarming rumors about their relationship. Nevertheless, Catherine managed to successfully play her role until April 1997, when she was finally arrested. This happened immediately after the woman sold the family restaurant for £500,000 Irish pounds. The case gained a lot of publicity in the press. The face of the widowed Mrs. Nevin did not leave the pages of newspapers and television screens, gradually becoming one of the most recognizable in the country. Having learned the details of the investigation from the police, the relatives of the deceased Tom also suspected Catherine of involvement in the murder and appealed to the court with a demand to freeze all his assets. As a result, the woman lost access even to the money received from the sale of the restaurant. The trial started in 2000, but the first hearing had to be stopped when it turned out that some of the jurors had already heard the story of the Nevin couple. The incredible attention of the media to the case significantly complicated the search for a suitable team of jurors. The forced pause dragged on for several days, during which Catherine even managed to visit the hospital. However, in the end, the process was still resumed. Of course, the defendant did not admit her guilt, and her lawyer insisted on the absence of direct evidence from the prosecution. But the prosecutors still had a few aces up their sleeves. In particular, they managed to find 3 witnesses who confirmed that between 1989 and 1991, Catherine approached them with a proposal to kill her husband or find someone for this dirty business. The investigation suggested that the main motive was the woman's desire to divorce Tom, which he categorically refused to do because of his religious beliefs. Therefore, Catherine allegedly decided to take extreme measures. To confirm this version, the results of the analysis of her internet activity were cited. It turned out that Mrs. Nevin made at least 18 requests related to her husband's death, as if studying what benefits his murder could bring. Experts estimated the family restaurant at approximately £670,000 Irish pounds. In addition, the couple owned 2 more properties with a total value of about £1 million. Tom also had a considerable insurance policy, for £200,000. And since the couple had no children, in the event of her husband's death, all the property and money would go to Catherine. So self-interest could well become a weighty motive for her. However, the police had suspicions that the woman did not act alone but had already managed to recruit an accomplice. The first on the list of probable assistants was William McLean, a former criminal known in certain circles as a smuggler. At the hearings, he stated that although he had a connection with Catherine in the past, by the way, he was her first lover when he started working as a bartender at the Nevin's restaurant, he did not confess to being involved in the murder. According to him, one day Mrs. Nevin did offer him £20,000 for the massacre of Tom, but McLean refused because he sincerely respected the owner of the establishment and believed that he did not deserve to die. John Jones, a former politician who owned a small shop in Dublin at the time of the trial, also came under suspicion. He said that he met Catherine when she invited him to the restaurant after a business meeting with Tom. The woman openly flirted with the guest, and soon a romance began between them. However, after a few weeks, Catherine called her lover and directly offered to deal with her husband. John thought it was some kind of bad joke, so he refused. But the persistent Mrs. Nevin did not calm down. Soon she contacted Jones again and laid out a detailed plan for the murder. To finally persuade her lover to take decisive action, Catherine once even came to his work in bruises and bandages, claiming that Tom had beaten her. In fact, the bruises and bandages on the woman's body appeared after a recent plastic surgery, which John, of course, knew well about. It was not the first time Catherine had gone under the surgeon's knife to preserve her beauty. But despite all the tricks of the defendant, her lover once again refused to take part in the insidious plan, and soon their connection was cut off. The third prosecution witness was Jerry, a subordinate of John Jones. It seemed that in her attempts to find a killer, Mrs. Nevin decided to bet on people with not too high an income, hoping that it would be easier to incline them to crime. According to Jerry, the defendant approached him at least a dozen times, offering various ways to deal with Tom and then avoid punishment. Among other things, she advised setting up an ambush for her husband during one of his trips to the country houses that the Nevins owned. Catherine believed that Tom would certainly go there with a large amount of cash, so everything could be portrayed as an ordinary robbery. However, despite numerous attempts at persuasion, Jerry refused the persistent temptress every time. Once they even met for dinner at a restaurant. There Catherine described in detail another murder plan. Allegedly, someone had to shoot her husband right in her arms so that he would die in the embrace of a loving wife. This already completely outraged Jerry, so after the final refusal, communication between them stopped. During the investigation, the investigators managed to find out that the heroine of this story had an affair with a security company employee named Tom Kennedy. Although both denied any connection, colleagues repeatedly saw Kennedy staying overnight at the hotel, having fun with the hostess in a separate room. However, the guard himself insisted that he was simply friends with Tom Nevin, and friendship was the only reason for his frequent visits to the restaurant. But the prosecution knew that shortly before Tom's death, Kennedy had received a very valuable gift from Catherine, which could well have been a veiled payment for the murder. The guard himself denied these assumptions, insisting that the very thought of a relationship with a married woman seemed extremely indecent to him. Moreover, at the time of the tragedy, Kennedy had already turned 60 and allegedly was not interested in such things at all. Another possible accomplice could have been a man named Edward, although he also rejected any hints of a close relationship with the defendant. However, according to the statements of several witnesses, Edward had his own set of keys to the restaurant and could visit there at any time. Tom Nevin allegedly found out about this, which greatly upset him, and he even managed to quarrel with his probable rival. So jealousy could become a good motive for murder. However, the investigation failed to prove the involvement of at least one of Catherine's lovers in this terrible crime. But several witnesses drew attention to one strange circumstance. It turns out that on March 19, on the eve of the tragedy, a stranger in a long cloak was spotted in the Nevin's restaurant, who made several phone calls to someone during the evening, each time speaking very quietly and looking around. Unfortunately, none of the staff was able to properly see the face of the mysterious visitor or hear the details of his conversations, but one waitress clearly remembered seeing the strange guest talking about something with the owner of the establishment. However, how the man got into the building and when he left, no one figured out. Some of the staff even suggested that the stranger could have stayed inside after closing, hiding in some shelter while waiting for the right moment to attack. Investigators thoroughly worked out several versions of what happened that night. According to one of them, Catherine herself could well have fired the shots. After all, at that time, only she and her husband remained in the room. In addition, experts found no traces or signs of a struggle. Tom was found shot in his reading glasses, with a pen in his hand. Therefore, most likely, he knew his killer and trusted this person, so her appearance in the restaurant late at night did not disturb or frighten the victim at all. However, forensic scientists could not find traces of gunpowder or other substances on the defendant's hands that would indicate that she had fired a pistol. The murder weapon was also not found. Although this did not exclude the possibility that Catherine had enough time to change clothes, thoroughly wash her hands, and get rid of the weapon, for example, take it out in the trunk of a stolen car. After all, about 2 hours passed between the approximate time of the attack and the call to the security service. On the other hand, some nuances of the crime indicated that Mrs. Nevin was unlikely to have coped with all this alone. Probably, she still had an accomplice who helped tie up the woman, take the money in the car, grabbing the pistol as well. This version was also supported by the suspicious negligence with which the criminals threw Tom's car in the middle of the street. Why would Catherine do that, risking drawing extra attention to herself? The resonant Nevin case was actively covered in the press, dubbing the main figurant the "Heartless Black Widow." The defendant quickly became the most famous Irish killer. Her striking appearance, stylish outfits, and makeup during the sessions invariably attracted the attention of journalists, who described every image of the "killer lady" in the smallest detail. The media even savored such details as the length of the skirt, the color of nail polish, or the style of glasses. In the end, the judge was forced to forbid reporters from focusing too much on the appearance of the defendant, urging them to focus on the essence of the case. The trial lasted 42 days, after which the jury went to the deliberation room to determine the verdict. It took 5 whole days before a unanimous decision was made on Catherine Nevin's guilt in the deliberate murder of her husband. The cold-blooded Black Widow was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, even behind bars, Mrs. Nevin did not stop trying to fight for her freedom. 3 years later, she again appeared in court, trying to appeal the verdict. Although the appeal was granted, the defense failed to provide any new and weighty evidence that would testify in favor of Catherine. In the end, the court of second instance did not find sufficient grounds to overturn the verdict, so Catherine Nevin's life imprisonment remained in force. The woman returned behind bars, but this did not stop her from further attempts to gain freedom. In 2010, another appeal took place. This time, the defense claimed that their client had become a victim of a miscarriage of justice. However, the arguments provided were not convincing enough, so the petition was rejected. For more years passed before Nevin's lawyers filed a cassation appeal with the Supreme Court of the country, but even there they did not see reasons for reviewing the case. Tom Nevin's death caused a lot of trouble for his relatives, as the man did not leave a will. And since the couple had no common children, according to the law, all the property was supposed to go to the widow. Fortunately, the mother of the deceased managed to secure the arrest of her son's bank accounts and real estate, including the funds received from the sale of the restaurant. After the conviction, Catherine was deprived of the rights to her husband's inheritance. However, the elderly woman did not have time to register all the necessary documents in her name. A year later, she passed away. Other members of Tom's family tried for a long time to unravel this tangle of bureaucratic obstacles and formalities in order to come into possession of the deceased's property. Their efforts were often hindered by various procedural issues and legislative nuances. Meanwhile, dramatic changes took place in the life of Catherine Nevin herself. In September 2016, the woman found herself in the hospital, where she was diagnosed with an incurable brain tumor. Thanks to this, the Black Widow received a short-term release for a course of therapy and spent 3 days in a medical institution, after which she returned behind bars. But already on November 7, her health condition sharply deteriorated. Catherine was hospitalized again, this time in the intensive care unit, where she stayed until August of the following year. Later, the woman was transferred to house arrest in a separate apartment. However, on November 6, 2017, another emergency medical assistance was required. A month and a half later, the convict was transferred to a hospice, where she spent the last weeks of her life. Catherine Nevin died on February 11, 2018, at the age of 67, never admitting her guilt in the murder of her husband until the very end. Although a lot of time has passed since that moment, the identity of her probable accomplice still remains unknown. Despite all the efforts of the investigators, no convincing evidence was found against any of the suspects. It is possible that the Black Widow took the answer to this question with her to the grave. However, no matter what secrets shrouded this confusing case, the memory of the victims of the terrible crime will forever remain in the hearts of their loved ones and relatives. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.